Madam Chair, we are recording the meeting and it's live streamed on YouTube. We can start our session.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee of NVTA. Today is June 20th, Thursday. So welcome to the meeting. I'm going to take roll. We have Board Member Susan Cunningham here, Supervisor Walkinshaw, Supervisor Angela Franklin, Council Member Sarah Bagley, Council Member Justine Underhill, Council Member John Steely, and Mayor Stanley Melange, and myself, Mayor Linda Coulter. Did I miss anyone? Okay. All right, we can begin. Our first item on the agenda is summary notes of May 22nd, 2024. Are there any changes to those notes? Of those motion for them to pass? So moved. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone against?
Extension.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 3 seconds. All righty. Next is a review of the 2024-2029 6-year program staff recommendations.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee, welcome. I'd like to play you a brief video, which will last about 3.5 minutes, which will go through an overview of our 6-year program process at a high level. I know many of you have been in these meetings where you've heard bits and pieces of this along the way. We want to make sure before we start the discussion this evening that everyone is kind of in the same place of understanding in terms of the overview. So do you want to go ahead and run that?
In Northern Virginia, the demand for transportation improvements outweigh the available financial resources. This reality propels the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority to evaluate and prioritize funding multimodal transportation projects to reduce congestion. This process is accomplished through NVTA's 6-year program. Every 2 years, the 6-year program identifies transportation projects that will be funded with NVTA regional revenue funds. The 6-year program process has 6 distinct phases. Beginning with a call for projects, counties, cities, and towns with a population of more than 3,500, transit agencies and other state and regional entities in Northern Virginia are eligible to apply. The next phase in the process determines which projects are eligible for NVTA funding. Candidate projects must be located in Northern Virginia and must be included in the current version of Transaction, NVTA's Long-Range Transportation Plan. The third phase of the process is one of the most robust. NVTA considers 3 quantitative factors for each eligible project. Let's take a closer look at how projects are evaluated. First, NVTA calculates congestion reduction relative to cost, or the CRRC rating. Each project is analyzed to quantify the amount of congestion that would be removed from the transportation system from the first year the project is complete through approximately 20 years from now. This result is then compared to the project cost to arrive at the CRRC rating. Next, we compute a transaction rating for each project. The transaction rating is a combination of 10 performance measures that rate each project on a range of potential benefits, including congestion reduction, access to jobs, safety, and reduction in vehicle emissions. The third quantitative analysis, long-term benefits, looks how closely the transportation impacts of NVTA-funded projects match the share of revenues attributed to each of NVTA's non-member jurisdictions. This helps to ensure over the long term the benefits of funded projects are fairly distributed across the region. NVTA also considers a range of qualitative factors for each project evaluation, including alignment with NVTA's core values of equity, safety.
Do you mind if I just check one thing real quick? Let's see if I can get this.
You can hear it on YouTube. You just can't hear it here.
Skip this, not sure. You can skip it.
Gotcha.
Right, as long as the public.
But the thing is then I can hear you talking over it and I'm like, what is happening? Let's see. It's playing on the sound, but what the issue is I can't get that sound up there recognized on this device. That's what's
Do you want
happening.
me to carry on?
So, yeah, because unless I unplug it and do everything. Yeah, I'm gonna change one thing with your PowerPoint. Yeah. Just
So this part of the video, I can say that we reference the core values. I want to emphasize that the core values which we described to you last month's meeting, we looked at for alignment with the projects for alignment with our core values of equity, safety, and sustainability. But those alignments are not taken into account in our recommendations, since it's a pilot initiative to look at the core values. I think we're pretty close to the end. We can skip the video at this point and go into the presentation.
Yep, it's frozen now. That's what's happening. Slide.
You have a fairly substantive presentation slide deck in your packets. I'm happy to speak to any part of that you would like me to, but I'm proposing to go through just a couple of highlights because I don't want to eat into your time for discussion. Starting with, and this is at a high level, looking at an overview of the NVTA staff recommendations. First off, what we're saying here is that the recommendations that we're making are at the highest level relative to funding requests for any previous 6-year program update, or indeed any NVTA funding program to date. So essentially, when we say 74%, what we mean is we're able to meet 74% of the funding requests that have been made to us. Our typical average is around 50%, and that higher number is a combination of very strong revenues, which are predominantly based on sales tax, together with a less than normal amount of project funding requests that were made to us. So the regional revenues available are just shy of $700 million, and we are recommending 22 of the 24 candidate projects receive funding. 19 of those projects are recommended for the full amount of the requested funding. 3 projects are recommended for a partial amount of the requested funding, and we are not recommending 2 of the 24 projects. And just as a side note, we'll footnote really at the bottom, 3 of the recommended projects, that's 3 of the 22 projects, are what we call continuation projects. They've received NVTA regional revenues in the past. But more significantly, that means that there are 19 of the recommended projects that NVTA has not seen before, which we take to mean that we're nowhere close to satisfying the demands for transportation dollars in Northern Virginia, that we could see 19 new projects in one cycle. On the next slide, please, Haroon, just a quick overview of how we interpret our recommendations across a number of factors. Firstly, at the multimodal and corridor level, we, as you may be aware, recall that NVTA is undertaking a preliminary deployment plan for bus regional transit in Northern Virginia, and 6 of the projects that are being recommended for funding are associated with 3 of the 5 BRT lines that are under development in Northern Virginia. So very consistent with previous initiatives from NVTA on that. Continued emphasis on the VRE Manassas line with 1 project on the VRE Manassas line. Previous projects have been further east and west of there. Continued emphasis further out in the region in Prince William County on the Route 28, Route 234 / Prince William County Parkway corridors, which, as you're probably familiar with, are pretty it's pretty in demand. From a transportation technology perspective, as we've seen in every previous funding cycle with transportation technology projects, the three technology projects are the top three ranked projects. And the reason this happens is these projects have a transportation impact and they tend to be relatively low cost. And so they generally gravitate towards the top of our ranked list. And also, encouragingly, two of those three technology projects, the first time NVTA has received funding and recommended funding for technology projects in Prince William County and the City of Falls Church. In the last cycle, you may recall Loudoun County submitted its first transportation technology project. Previously, the transportation technology projects have been focused in Arlington and the City of Alexandria. Overall, we consider that despite the fact we can't fund everything, the recommendations are geographically and modally balanced. All 10 applicants receive at least one project funding recommendation, and all of the modes with which funding was requested we receive at least one funding project. So Verena, I'm going to start skipping slides at this point. I would say happy to come back to any of these, but if we could go to the slides just after the public comment. Well, actually, just pause on that one. I'll go back to the public comment trends. Next one, that one. Just very quickly on this slide, looking at this shows the funding programs across the history of NVTA revenues. The green and the red lines indicate respectively the number of comments we received and the number of commenters. Commenters typically comment on more than one project, which is why the green line is higher than the red line. But since the very first 6-year program, which was the large one in the middle, the 2018 to 2023 6-year program, the red line has been declining continuously, and with one bump in one cycle, so has the green line. We're not really sure the reasons why, because we certainly are not lacking in our efforts to get public comment. But for whatever reason, Northern Virginians are commenting at a lower rate now than they were earlier on in NVTA's history, and particularly since the first 6-year funding program. So we are currently well below the average for the number of comments and well below the average for the number of commenters. The requested amount and the allocated amount down slightly, but we can't really know why that trend is happening. As I say, it is not because of lack of effort on our part. We've done more in this cycle to get comments than in any previous cycle. Next slide, please. We may come back to this. It's a bit too detailed to dwell on right now, but from left to right, you see each of the projects listed with their code. The code is in other documents in your packet. So basically, you see the distribution of comments from the highest on the left with just under 70 to the lowest on the right with just over 10. The deeper blue represents support, the lighter blue represents opposition, and what we call vague, for the want of a better word, is where we cannot discern whether it's support or opposition. But it is a comment on the project nonetheless. Next slide, please. So at this point in the presentation, we're talking about in a bit more detail about the recommendations. So essentially, this presentation and what I'll say will focus on the projects that are not receiving funding to the full amount of what it's requested, because the other 19 are, and the other 19 are all 24 projects are in a list, which is in your packet. It's the very last, should be the very last couple of pages in your packet. One shows the list of projects which includes, let me just pull it out. Wave at you. So you know you've got the right one. This one, this is the project. The ID numbers are down this side, and on this side are the ranks by congestion reduction relative to cost, which is the legal requirement that we follow most closely in terms of how we construct this table. They are the project. So if anything that's shown on that with a kind of a pinkish red highlight is the two projects that are not recommended for funding, and towards the bottom of the list you see a number of projects with the dollar amount recommended in red font. They're the ones which are receiving less than the requested amount, which is 2 columns to the left of that in that table. So just focusing on the 5, the 2 projects that are not being recommended for funding, Glen Boulevard project in the city of Fairfax, and the CC to DCA, which is Crystal City to DCA, as in the airport, DCA multimodal connection in Orange County. These projects have been previously disclosed to NVTA as being fully funded, or declared as being fully funded with NVTA regional revenues. The request that we received did not represent a change in scope, and so consistent with established practice where such overages come to us, we do not fund these overages. It is up to the project sponsors to work out how they can close that gap. They can potentially use NVTA's 30% revenues. They can use the federal programs, CMAC and RSTP, including eventually transfers between projects. They can use Smart Scale, the state funding program. They can use federal programs. What they cannot use is NVTA's regional revenue. So that's the first reason. We do not have a fund for cost overages. We do not have money sitting around to pay for an overage. And that's got a more philosophical problem were we to fund these overages, in that we fear that there will be no incentive for applicants to not lowball their project funding requests and come back and ask for more money later. If that happens, given that our most important criteria is congestion reduction relative to cost, and the estimated cost is coming in consistently on the low side, it messes up our evaluation of projects completely. This is the reason why we're not funding these 2 projects. In the case of the city of Fairfax, the amount of money previously received is 13 million. The amount requested is 5.4 million. On top of that, that's 42% more than what was originally approved. In the case of the CC and DCA, the request is for 21.1 million. The previous amount awarded is 18 million. So this one is coming in at 117% of the original amount that's been approved for funding. No part of this affects the funding approvals that have already been made. They don't get removed, stay in place. But it is up to the project sponsor to address the shortfall. On the next slide, talk about the 3 projects with partial funding. All 3 of these projects were in Fairfax County. All 3 of these projects are towards the bottom of our CRRC list. These 3 have been chosen for a combination of reasons: that low CRRC ranking, policy 29 non-compliance, which is something that might not make immediate sense, but in the large summary should be. It's the large 11 by 17 sheet. We look at past performance and policy 29 like that. In the case of Fairfax County, those are not as high a range as we would prefer to see. But nonetheless, what we are doing with the three projects, so first our private road multimodal improvements, we are recommending just over 27 million be funded against funding requests of 90 million, and this will enable this project to begin its preliminary engineering work, provide some provision for right of way. They did also request construction money. It's unlikely that construction money will be needed for quite a number of years, and so this funding still enables this project to advance. And it will be up to Fairfax County if they so choose to come back and request the construction money at a later stage. Keep in mind, the next group of projects is just under a year away. The second project is Frontier Drive Extension and Intersection Improvements. The recommendations are just over 111,000. Excuse me, 111 million. Thank you. Compared to a request of 164, close to 165 million. Frontier Drive Extension project has previously received NVTA funds for preliminary engineering and right of way phases, and much the same as the two projects I mentioned earlier. Those phases have been declared to us to be fully funded, and so therefore we have taken the position that we will not put any more money into those two phases for that project, but we do cover the cost of the requested cost of construction. The final project for Fairfax County is the Road 7 multimodal improvements between the Beltway and 66. This recommendation is for 101 million versus a request for 210 million. Essentially, it creates capacity for enhanced transit in that corridor, potentially that can be used for the Envision Route 7 BRT project between Tysons and the Mark Centre in Alexandria, where it will connect with the West End Transitway, which is a City of Alexandria BRT project. With this project, we are recommending funding that will cover the cost of preliminary engineering, and I think some of the right of way, but not all of it, and none of the construction requests. As with the previous two projects, this will allow the project to advance to a point, come back and ask for more money or seek money from another source. So that's where we ended up with staff recommendations. And we'll just on the next slide make a mention of long-term benefit. Long-term benefit is another thing that is in the code relating to NVTA's funding. What we refer to as HB 2313 from 2013, and that requires, as you can read here, what the requirement is that in the long term or over the long term, each member jurisdiction, these are the 4 counties and the 5 cities, will receive a benefit that is approximately equal to the share of revenues received and contributed to that locality. So this is something we've previously said, certainly to staff and I think to the committees as well, will not be used to fund low performing projects, nor will it be used to not fund high performing projects. But in this particular cycle, we did not apply long-term benefit because of 2 reasons. The first reason being the higher than normal available funding, the 74% mentioned earlier that we have available. In the past, we've used long-term benefit when things have been more competitive as a discriminating factor, but that didn't really appear to be in play this time to us, and also in order to apply long-term benefit, which basically means to fund a project, in this case in Arlington County, which is where the one main jurisdiction which has most in arrears, as it were, of the long-term benefit relative to the share of recent revenues received and attributed. Were we to do that, we would have to take funding away from one or more projects in Prince William County. Because Prince William County is the opposite to Arlington, it's received more than its share of benefit, based on the calculations. So, given the relative rankings of the Arlington and Prince William projects, we felt that the evaluation such that long-term benefit should not prevent the Prince William from receiving funding, and so we did not apply long-term benefit to address that. We will continue to look at long-term benefit in every cycle, and we will continue to strive to get them the benefit in balance, but it is heavily dependent upon the project applications that we receive. We cannot balance things up if the projects are not there in the first place to award the money to. So that's a challenge we'll have to work on in the years ahead. Yes, I'm pretty much done now, so I'm more than happy to take a pause. So I know I give you a lot of input.
Okay, anyone? Yeah.
Actually, while we're on it, can I ask a question about long-term benefit? Is there a period of time that is used to decide what long-term means, or is it over a 6-year period?
So and chime in, the law is silent on a period of time. As a matter of fact, when we were newer in HB 2313 and we asked members of the General Assembly, what did you mean? And they told us, well, we could tell you what we did not mean. And they said, we did not mean dollar in, dollar out, and over some period of time. So in December of 2014, the authority adopted principles, not a policy, but principles to assess long-term benefit. And I will note, we go further than the principles because the principle says, number one, we do a 10-year look back. Last year we would have hit our 10-year. That's the first thing. Second thing, 50% of long-term benefit is attributable to the project location. So if the project is in the city of Alexandria and it's 10 million, 5 million off the top will be attributed to the city. Then it says the remaining balance is based on trip origin and destination. So where are people going? So no particular jurisdiction will bear the full cost because projects impact more than people who reside in that one locality. Then the last factor, one more, was long-term benefits to be assessed on completed projects. So what we've been doing is assessing long-term benefits on every project that's included in the funding program. So when we do these funding programs biannually, because it helps us, it helps you to know where you are. Now, the law also says on revenues received and attributed to the locality, you should get your proportional share. Now, the attributed part is what we've really been following because we're doing out year. So we have an estimate. We estimate because we work with your staff as well on how much we should generally receive from every locality. And this really gets into how we populate the estimated numbers we think we will have from the funding program. But the received part is really where we are when we do closeout on each fiscal year. So this is how we assess long-term benefit, and we try to go a little further than the principles because we don't want anyone to be too far out and then having to play catch up over several funding programs. But I call your transportation directors every time we get to the point of recommendation. And I remind everyone, you probably won't be squared away every funding program. That and you know, have to have the conversation with Prince William. Next funding program, you may not see as many funded projects. So you probably won't be squared away dollar for dollar. And I know, I get it. Everyone looks at it dollar for dollar, dollar in, dollar out. And that's the one thing the General Assembly told us, that's what they did not mean.
Yeah, so a different note, the comments here, the decline in comments. I'm curious what ideas are is staff considering to, change that, change that trajectory? Are you, speaking with, speaking from Alexandria, I guess we've had some growing success, getting public comments, trying out some new methods. I mean, just think like WhatsApp, even, just going into different directions, using pop-ups. I'm sure you guys are trying a lot of the same things, but I just wanted to ask, like, is there a study to be done, a consultant to be retained, an in-house examination about how to turn that tide around on the decline in comments?
Yeah, we've certainly scratched our heads about this during this process. What we do at the end of each cycle is we can perform an after action review on ourselves to look at what works well, where we think we can improve. Clearly looking at those long-term trends for public comment, we need to do a deeper dive on what we can learn for the reasons for that. Most likely what we'll do in the interim is, or initially, is to talk to your staff, just to get exactly what you just said, your perceptions on how people comment. I mean, it's possible that both the transaction, a long-range plan, and the 6-year program, the funding side of things, that because we're looking into out years, it maybe isn't real enough for people to be able to relate to. And maybe, what the city and others find is that people really get engaged when it gets to the point of something that's going to get built. It begins to affect people in more ways than earlier on in this process. I think it's probably fair to say that when we look at the geographic distribution of the comments that we receive, they don't always bear a close relationship with the location of the projects that they are commenting on. I think probably it's fair to say some groups can kind of, can marshal some support or opposition to a project through various memberships, whatever.
So I'll just say it. One thing we took away this funding program was the submission of comments via email. Because one thing we found was we were getting blast email, I mean, literally read verbatim, word for word, and the volume was growing. So we wanted to make sure, to the extent possible, that we could have comments that were really put a little more effort. Now, I'm not saying, because we did have Google form, and if you have the time, you can do that too, but really try to get more substantive comments instead of some of the blast email.
Copy paste.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess what I would be curious about as you're like examining, new ways to do that is maybe as part of when you're soliciting feedback, make it sometimes less project specific and more, what are the kind of transportation investments you'd like to see? Because I do think, to your point, to a resident, a project that's 4 years from now, that it isn't feeling as real. But maybe if you broaden the request for feedback or add a way to say, I might bike more if I felt safer doing it, or I might use transit more if I had more frequency, on certain bus lines. I admittedly, I don't know every mechanism you've used, and I'm not trying to suggest you're not doing that, but to your point that it can be difficult with the menu of programs to elicit comment, maybe providing some input that is less project specific and more trend request, more modal method, trying to get feedback. I don't know exactly how you would then put that into a model, but it might instigate at least more conversation with the public. People would feel more comfortable saying, well, I don't know the specifics of, Route 7, expansion, but I know that this is what I'd like to see in my transportation experience.
Yeah.
And that's helpful. And the other thing I will note is this is probably one of our funding programs that the requests have been the lowest, still oversubscribed, but compared to other funding programs, not nearly as oversubscribed is the request that we've seen in the past. And if you look at the modal breakout of the request, it's, I don't know if the word is even, but we've seen the request for a lot of different modes other than roads. So we don't know really where the answer lies, but I do know we tried to put some things in place to give us some true comments. And it was also noted that, oh, wow, this is one of the funding programs where we are lower subscribed in our oversubscription. So we will take a look at that in the after action.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming. I remember, and you all are gonna remember that what town or city it was, but it's the same year that Vienna got funding for the
Hillsborough.
park garage.
Hillsborough.
Who was it?
Hillsborough.
I knew you remember, right? And Hillsborough, I mean, they got their residents fired up and they came to that meeting. So I know part of it could be locally, the communication that the local community does with its residents. This is going. And then, of course, I think we all know as elected officials that, and I'm not saying you have great ideas, but a lot of times people come out when they're opposed to something or their project did not get on the list, which is what I think Hillsborough was not on, and then
Oh, they
they
were.
got funded.
They were on the list, I think, and that was the last public hearing before COVID.
Right.
And they literally brought out maybe the whole town
They
minus two.
Yes, yeah.
But,
They did.
yeah, they were just trying to say, oh, we gotta emphasize upon the authority that we really would love funding for the project. But you're right.
I was that spot.
Yeah.
I would qualify though that the project itself had inherent transportation benefits.
Yeah.
So I could only speculate really at this stage as to whether, had they not shown up in force at the public hearing, whether we might still have recommended that project for funding anyway because of its transportation benefits. So, yeah, it certainly doesn't do any harm. It certainly leaves a lasting impression when that many people show up at a public hearing. But mapping the path between public comments and actual projects that get funded is not a straight line.
Right.
It's a factor
Right.
alongside other factors.
Right.
And the most important thing, I think, from our point of view is that newly elected officials can see the public comments and you judge yourselves as to what weight you want to put on the public comments, because there's no algorithm to do that.
Anyone else? Yeah. Right.
Two questions. You mentioned the number of projects that were BRT related. Could you just tell us, because I know some of them, I think, but I think you said there were 6, and I don't, is BRT specifically indicated in the little diagram logos there, or?
It's not specifically indicated on here, but if I can just quickly go through them. So I'm going to read from the bottom up because I'm looking at Route 7 model improvements, and that's one of them. Looking further up, the next one.
Ring Road.
Okay, so you see Alexandra Metroway enhancements, which is Route 8. The South Van Dawn Street Bridge enhancements just above that is going to have bus facilities that will benefit the West End Transitway. The Seven Corners Ring Road improvements ranked at 4 is on the route of Envision Route 7. One of the Alexandria ones. There's an Alexandria project which is looking at safety improvements. Yeah, sorry, thank you. On number 11, ranked 11, these high pressure intersections are some of them very approximate to the location of the West End Transitway. And then the final one is the very top one, the City of Falls Church Signal Privatization Project. Written Route 7 will run through the City of Falls Church. Those signal improvements should be beneficial to transit operations generally, but BRT. So that's it.
And to Ms. Backman's point about the measurement of the benefit vis-a-vis different jurisdictions. I presume that those that are BRT connected, obviously, a lot of those trips, these, for these projects that are located in Fairfax County or City of Alexandria, those are trips that are going to be originating in one or the other parts of the region, so that benefit is spread maybe even more than a road project would be.
It's possible when we look at the benefit side of things in two different ways. One which is kind of more focused on where the project is, and one that's more focused on where the people are traveling from through that project. So we can look at how it affects jurisdiction in terms of, itself as an entity, but also the trips going through a jurisdiction which start and finish somewhere else. So that's a benefit due to a project, say in Fairfax County, with people traveling. In fact, the Route 7 widening, which was the other one was cut on May 22nd, is a very good example because
More people from Loudon.
half the people from Fairfax, half the people from Loudon do that same project, and indeed quite a number of people from much further afield from either of those two counties. So, we look at it one way, it doesn't take account of that, we look at it another way. So we get two data points to compare against. So it's not exactly a range, but it is two data points, which gives us an idea of where it fits in relation to the revenues. The revenues are very easy to calculate and very precise because we can count the money. Counting benefit is a model-based analysis, and it needs to be interpreted.
And then second question, the local priority column here. Can you explain, because if I'm looking at it correctly, pretty much everyone said every one of their projects was a very high priority with a couple big highs. So is it, are the jurisdictions not actually asked to truly prioritize or rank order their projects?
We leave it to the jurisdictions as to how they want to do that. So basically, what they're ranking is all the things that you're submitting to us. How do you rank them at a local level? So it's not all the the important projects in Fairfax County necessarily.
Right. I understand, but are you asking them to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or is it just higher?
Yeah. I would also say that's not anywhere remotely close to a factor in the making staff recommendations. The local priority would only come into play if we got to a line and we said, well, we've now got to choose between these two projects and the vote from Fairfax County. Everything else is equal. What's the local priority? We'll go with that one. But that's not something that we're statutorily required to look at. But it's helpful with a potential tiebreaker situation, but it's rarely used in our process. But it'd be better to have the information than not have it.
Councilmember Steele.
I appreciate that. Just two quick thoughts and then a share there. I'm a short timer. I'm not running for re-election, so I get to speak very freely now. It's very, very, very exciting. Deduction, the CRRC calculation is based on the total project cost, not just the portion funded by the NVTA.
Correct.
And so I think that's an important thing to remind when we talk about it, because some of these numbers fluctuate based on the percentages there, so don't because costs are all over there. And so that leads to my suggestion to everyone. I think going forward, now you have additional data to look at and look back in there, understanding when projects change design versus when projects cost more due to the market will be a helpful analysis to do, because we're all running into the space now where bids are coming in different areas. And if you look a year ago where bids were, and we're asked to factor out multiple years in advance, market fluctuations up and down. I think understanding that difference will be helpful in communicating to this body when a decision may make sense. If the organization says, we believe this to be fully funded, we haven't changed the design, here it is, and we come back and all of a sudden, take what's happened in the past year, we are now 30% over budget, just like everybody else. What do we do? I think that's a better conversation than we thought it was fully funded, and I can say this, on a 2-year election cycle, a whole new group of people came in, and all of a sudden we now like orange instead of purple, and that has caused us to go back to redesign because the elected body can do that. I think that's a different conversation. So I think creating some space for that discussion here will benefit everybody over the longer term, because I know we've certainly faced that. I don't give any reaction.
No, I appreciate it, and I think that's a great suggestion, and one thing I would note, and this is where I think it's a gray area, and we will work on that. When you sign and execute the standard project agreement, there is a paragraph in there that says the applicant is to notify the CEO of any changes in scope, cost, and things of that nature. But what we're finding is I'm not being notified and they're not executed as PA. We find out at the application stage when we're doing another call for project. I think if we can have more communication, and that's something we're trying to make sure, because we used to do quarterly project meetings, but things are getting a little rough for us, but I said we have to go back doing that so we can have that constant line of communication open on what's going on with the project, regardless of whether you have an executed SPA. Because when you do that, that means you're ready to spend down money. And you may not be, you may be spending federal dollars first, but still running into some project level issues. So that is something we do want to make sure we take into consideration. And the other thing, and I know this isn't a popular thing, but, and it's not popular because congestion reduction relative to cost is very important. And applicants sometimes feel if their projects cost more, it's going to impact negatively their congestion reduction relative to cost score. Now, what we've tried to convey is 2 things. Number one, if you're unsure about cost, you should phase your project. That puts your project in a better position with us, and keep time in if I'm saying something out of order. And then your project, when we're evaluating it, the next funding cycle, now it's a continuation project, something that we take into consideration, particularly if the project is advancing. And the other thing is we pay on a reimbursement basis. So whatever your project costs, that's what it costs at the end of the day. If you don't need all of the money, great, we will transfer it back to the regional revenue fund and free it up for the next funding cycle. Because it's really better maybe better to do that versus, okay, because everyone has these cost escalations and things of that nature. And sometimes, and this gets to having congestion reduction relative to cost, it may not move the needle as much as you think. I'll get Richmond Highway BRT, for example, because that's a huge project and the project that has the most funding from the authority on it. I think the first time we evaluated the project cost was 300 million, or I can't remember the total cost because we do it on total cost. When it came in again for additional funding, the cost was more than 300 million. When we ran the model, did not move the needle at all. Now, part of it is the magnitude, the scope and scale of that project is huge. I won't say that that would be the same for every project, but again, just having that communication, we're going to make sure we start doing the check-ins because we want the projects to come to fruition. And the other thing I'd say is give yourself some flexibility in when you submit work and submit your application. Now, they can't be overly vague because we do need to model, but give yourself some flexibility.
I think that's the one extra thing I would add is lesson learned for us, particularly in this cycle because of the cost escalation stuff that's going on, which council members do raise, is if we see projects that are coming in and asking for preliminary engineering and right of way and construction, we're going to be thinking, what's that construction cost based on? How confident are you in it? What contingency have you put in it? Yeah. And do you seriously want to do that? Because it would seem to me, at least, I can't speak for any views, but if you're going to take a risk on something coming in above budget, put that risk on preliminary engineering, not on construction or right of way. Because you will at least have more room for flexibility if you get your PE costs wrong. Which you can't, until you've done your PE, you probably are not really going to have a good handle on the construction costs. And this process is every 2 years. And it's not like, and it's one of the best projects, in fact, best programs for competitive funding than anything else that any of you can apply to. The only things that are more guaranteed will be NVTA 30% revenues, which are passed through. You get exactly the amount that our calculations say you're entitled to.
Not our company.
Revenue sharing is through the Commonwealth is reasonably reliable, but it's got a cap on it. And next to that, you've got programs like CMAC and RSDP, for which you could be fairly confident in the amount of money you're going to get. But when it comes to smart scale, also with federal programs, you're competing with a lot of other people. So I think getting it right with the regional revenues is one of the best avenues for all of you to get funding. But it's still competitive. You've got to get it right.
Cron Sings from, thank you, Chair, Madam Chair. Cron Sings from Loudoun County, your regular member in this class is double booked tonight, so that's why I'm here representing Loudoun. Just out of curiosity, and thank you for allowing me to attend. Just out of curiosity, has the committee ever voted down any recommendations from the group?
I think there have been situations where individual members may have voted against a set of recommendations. I can let it
Committee, as a committee.
But as a committee as a whole, no.
no.
Been on for attention.
Yeah,
Been on pretty much. Oh, it's been a long time, but I don't feel all that. Yeah.
And never any changes.
Excuse me.
And never any changes or tweaks to it. Given.
We've seen that at the planning and programming committee level, and that committee is the committee of the authority, by authority members. But it puts you or whoever's making the recommendation in the position, with the authority approved 696 million and some change to fund this program. We as staff recommended programming 696 million and some change. So if you want to switch, you have to be mindful. If you want a project that isn't being recommended for funding to be funded, the money has to come from somewhere. And that's where it gets interesting. It could get interesting, but it did happen at the planning and programming committee.
But I think it's also worth emphasising that this committee, the technical advisory committee, the planning and programming committee make recommendations to NVTA, and NVTA is the only body that can be take action on.
We're an advisory. I shouldn't say just, but we're advisory. Yeah, please, Councilman.
Do you send the jurisdictions the comments or a summary of the comments so that they can take into consideration either what support or opposition there is?
The public comments we received?
Yes.
They're already posted on our website in full, as well as a summary report. I think in the meeting packet we sent out to you, there's a link in that meeting packet which takes you to all of the information that's related to the 6-year program, including all the public comments. So they're all there. So, and also we remind your staff that they should be mindful of comments that have been received related to their jurisdiction application, so that going forward, if they are approved for funding by us or they get funding from somewhere else, they've already had a first tranche of comments on their project.
But once these are, I guess, approved by NVTA, there isn't room for the jurisdiction to specifically change the project based on feedback that they might have gotten from constituents. This funding locks in whatever sort of, I guess if it's preliminary engineering, it locks in that. If it's construction, that's absolutely locked in, and right away would be locked into.
in a limited number of cases, we have had notifications, directly or otherwise, the project scopes have changed. And when that happens, it triggers a review here to see whether scope changes which have now, you know, arisen for whatever reason. It could be change of a governing body. It could be, you know, preliminary engineering has unearthed a better solution to a problem than was originally conceived. What we do is we reevaluate the project, which involves remodeling the project usually, to see how its performance changes against the candidate pool that it was competing against at the time the funding was approved. In order to see whether the change in scope of the project would cause us to have made a different recommendation at the time. So far, in the limited number of cases where this has happened, that's not been the case. The scope has changed. We've gone through the process. We've concluded that even if the CRRC rank score changed and the ranking changed, but based on the recommendations that were made at the time, 2, 4, 6, 8 years ago, the project would still have been recommended. In other words, you know, if the functionality was decimated and the project CRRC meant that it went from the number 10 ranked project to the number 24 ranked project, say, then, you know, we might say, well, we wouldn't have funded that had we known it was going to be 24 ranked. But if instead of being 10th, it went to 11th, and we funded all the way down to 16 or 18, then chances are we would still have recommended it. Now, none of that's to say that if jurisdictions come back and say we need more money, that's different. What we're talking about here is a scope change and how that affects the performance of the project. If I understood your question correctly, that's what I was answering. If I answered the wrong question.
No, that covered it.
It's a very rare occurrence, but it has happened.
Okay. Now I went through the packet and I also looked through the project application. I did not read through the specific comments. And so if we go back to the comment slide, there are 2 projects that received a fair amount of opposition. I was just wondering if you could summarize or at least explain, like, do you happen to know what the opposition generally, what the flavor of the opposition was?
Are you referring to
LDN 29, LDN 33? Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of in the middle of the range of the number of comments per project in total. But the dark blue, which is support, is low relative to the light blue, which is opposition. This is one of those situations where it's actually quite interesting. Very few of the comments in opposition were from people who declared a zip code that was anywhere close to the location of the project. In fact, ironically, most of the comments in opposition to these 2 projects were from people who reside in the city of Falls Church. I just say that because that's what the analysis of the information shows us. Mostly the comments were concerns that widened roadways will lead to sprawl and induced demand. Induced demand is something that our model partially takes into account anyway. So if there is certainly short-term induced demand, Arun, shake your head if I'm saying this wrong. If there's, you know, kind of short-term induced demand, our model will pick it up. But the very long-term stuff where people start making, you know, major changes to behavior is probably impossible to model, to be honest. So we wouldn't pick that up. But in this case, these 2 projects, that was the nature of the comments that we received.
I also, it's funny that you mentioned that because I also happen to get letters from constituents, I guess, about some of these different projects, but, so I was curious. As to.
Yeah, I mean, every comment is valid and equally weighted, but understanding, trying to understand the perspective of the commenter is what we try to share with you so that you can take that into account in any decision making that you make.
Okay, anything else? We're good, okay. Any other comments or questions?
Please, gonna wait. So they're so gone because it's regarding when it's this ranking last, but having the.
Go ahead, I think your turn.
Okay, cool. So let me, share this too. I think we were pretty shocked in Arlington to find that the project, which is a common priority that was part of the Amazon agreement, was deprioritized. I think this is a design build project, which may be a little different than some of the other projects. We have to coordinate with the airport authority, with the National Park Service, with the Department of Defense, with ourselves, with the state, with NVTA. And so the complexity of that to go across wetlands to work through connecting what is truly like the regional hub and the Virginia hub of transportation to connect up VRE, Metro, eventually Amtrak, so that all of our visibility and part of the South really travelers can come through alternate modes instead of through taxi and cars. So we were surprised to see it bump down there. I think our staff have been in communication, I'm putting it, so I'm catching up too, but have been in communication all along that the intent was to put a placeholder in and do the design build. We're now at 10% design, and so we have more real numbers. We know how long the bridge is going to be. We know it's a bridge instead of a tunnel, which when we put it in was still up, was that early of a question. And then it's also an area where a lot of NVTA investment and kind of crowd investment has happened already in terms of the metro entrances and getting that whole hub to really work. Arlington's a tiny little piece, but we're also like the end of the funnel that helps keep everything from log jamming. So to us, that is not only a really important project for the region, and truly all the region, but also a crucially time sensitive one in that we are ready to let that design build project agreement now RFP and then move forward in 2025 alongside the construction that the VRE platform is happening and the Persephone East Metro entrance are happening. And so we would really advocate for reconsidering that for the of the region.
Any comments? I don't know if staff has any comments to that.
Madam Chair, like I said previously, it really is your recommendation to me, but the funding would have to come from the project that we are recommending funding.
Right, and I think we would recommend, we don't have two projects here because we were trying to prioritize, but it was very clear that this project is more crucial to the region and thereby to Arlington, to be good regional players than the Shirlington project, which was approved at a higher ranking for some reason. So we would move that we reallocate those dollars. That does not close the gap fully, and so we would advocate that we can see conversations that we can see whether there might be a way to go further. But tonight I'd really like to move that we. We'll get to there, but what I'd like to put forward is at least the Arlington dollars get combined so that the project that's most complete for the region might be able to move forward on time without failing to meet the commitments that the Commonwealth has made.
Is that a motion?
Do you want me to do it now? As a motion?
Well, I mean, we can, if you're gonna make a motion.
Yeah,
you might
I'll
as well
do
go ahead
it that, or if anyone.
And then we can
wants
have,
to discuss first.
then,
Yeah.
we'll discuss after the motion.
Happy, I'll second the motion.
Okay,
Look, you want to read
okay,
it
now
out?
we can have discussion.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay,
go ahead,
okay.
you wanna
Do
read
you want me
it?
to read it?
Yes.
Yes, we.
And then we'll have-
Sorry,
Yeah.
so I don't think we have anything on the floor at the moment.
That's what she was gonna
So I think you have to put the whole thing on the floor and then.
Right, so maybe we should.
Well,
I thought, I was just looking for guidance on how to best do that. I'm open to. I'm just
right.
double checking.
I think,
Before the chair.
yeah, no, that probably would be better. I think we
Happy
could
to
do,
Yeah.
Make a motion and then.
I think you could do that.
So you can.
Well, we
you can
make
move it.
motion and an amendment.
You can move an amended.
Yeah,
and
so I was gonna say, we could do an
recommendation.
amendment. We can do that.
You can move
Right,
the recommendation with.
We can do it that way. I think so. I think that, you are a substitute for Sylvie, for Supervisor Sylvie Glass, and I think in the bylaws,
Yeah,
it's fine to have a
yeah.
substitute.
Yeah,
So, you will be voting.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I'm sorry to not call your name in the roll. Here.
Make sure to add into the roll.
Yeah. Okay, so we can do it that way. Is there a motion? On the
I
recommended
have a question. about
project,
what's
or we're gonna
going
start?
on.
Go ahead.
Because I want to make sure we understand.
Right.
So the 11.4 million, is that a 4 or 2? Six, thank you. 11.6 for Shirlington, which would fully fund the project. You want to take that 11.6 off of the Shirlington bus station expansion to put it on CCDCA, which wouldn't cover the full cost. So where would the balance come from?
I mean, I think we will have to find the balance, with the state and with Commonwealth, with perhaps, PPC will have some comments too, but I think we'd rather be halfway there, because we need to build us the Commonwealth promised it in a fairly big agreement. And we can't build it in a way that doesn't work for Park Service and others, it just doesn't work.
When NVTA does the partial funding, do they normally know where the other funding is coming from?
Well, so it's interesting for a case like this because, and I understand what Board Member Cunningham has said, but for our purposes, when we put the 18 million on it 4 years ago, that fully funded the project. Now, that's neither here nor there because then the project came in last for congestion reduction relative to cost, which by code is something we have to give priority to. If you want to do this, number one, we have to document. It is required that we document anytime we quote unquote go out of order in funding projects for their congestion reduction relative to cost score. But this also means is we assume Shirlington, we wouldn't see the Shirlington bus expansion again because we had recommended full funding for it now.
So are those policies sort of stated somewhere that?
It's not necessarily a policy, but you want to, you could have Shirlington fully funded. Oh, yes, the bus garage fully funded.
Bring back the other one next year.
But that's not what you would like to do. You want to take that off of a project that you're saying this 11.6 were fully funded and put it on a project where you would get half of the money. That's something you could do, but it is going to be something if you come and resubmit Shirlington for the next funding cycle, we have quantitative and qualitative analysis. And that is something that we would have to consider.
Again, I think some of this is pretty opaque to us in terms of, again, it was quite a surprise given that we've been in fairly close conversation across the years. When this project was brought forward, the NVTA had not been done yet. You know, it was clear that there was going to be some additional work to be done, and we completed that work.
It wasn't really clear from your application. But that's neither here nor there, because like I said, what we were told is that 4 years ago was fully funded. So when we saw it in this funding cycle, we picked up the phone and called staff to say, hey, what's going on? We thought this 18 million we put on the project 4 years ago fully funded the project. And at that time, we were told, when you submitted 4 years ago, you really weren't at 30% design and you were unsure, or staff was unsure how much the project, what was the exact cost of the project.
Yeah, I mean, we may run into this more often in some other jurisdictions as well, like if some projects are best done as a design build in order to make sure that the right project is built, you don't have huge cost overruns. This is one of those, like, I mean, how many times you've had to touch national park land, that just brings it up to another level, and then the airport on top of it, make sure operations are steady. So I think we knew from the beginning that that was going to be the preferred pathway. So we might need to learn from that, you know, collectively, because I think that would be the first or last project that needs to be designed build.
And we reviewed design build projects before. So I don't know if that project falls into this particular scenario, because we have reviewed and evaluated design build projects previously. But for our purposes, because when we were aware that this was an Amazon package project and things of that nature, but it put us in position, and not so much as you being fully funded last or 4 years ago. Your congestion reduction relative to cost is 24 out of 24. And with 696 million in estimated available revenue, but with an ask of 958 million, we always knew that there were going to be a project or two or three that wouldn't get a recommendation for funding. So I don't want to get into, at least from our perspective, not from yours, but you can say whatever it is you feel free to say. But in looking at how the project was presented to staff 4 years ago, and now, and that's why when Keith had on the slide, there was no change in scope from what was submitted 4 years ago. So we did ask Arlington County staff, like, hey, we thought this was fully funded. What happened?
When you say no change in scope, when it was a significant design was completed in an environmental analysis.
When the 18 million was originally submitted, we have an online process which requires applicants to fill out the dollar amount they require by phase, the cost of each phase, and if there's a difference, what other funding do you have for that phase, so that when we add up all the numbers, either you've got all the funding you need with NVTA approval of the amount you're requesting of us, and there's no funding gap, or there is a funding gap. And it is a simple math that's done through our online application process. When the application was filled out for it, it was quite clear that the cost of every phase on that project will be met in full if NVTA approved the project for $18 million. I would note that at the time you had funding on this project from CMAC and some local sources as well. I'm not aware of whether there's been any requests for more money through CMAC or Smart Scale or wherever else. But the fact remains, as Ms. Batten said, when it came to us, it was declared as fully funded. Now, whether or not we knew at the time it was submitted that it was or wasn't likely to be fully funded, I don't know. We can only go by what was in your application, which was approved by your board for a governing body resolution at the time. But now we're presented with a different set of facts. And you know, as I said earlier, I mean, this committee can vote on what it wants. I can't tell you what on them. That's, you know,
But I guess that's the discussion. My understanding is the regional value of that project is not insignificant. Whereas the regional value of the Shirley project is probably not. But you know, so I just think it's important, like if we're meeting to have recommendations, I feel like we should discuss that and make sure that we're.
Sure.
Recommendation.
So, yes,
I'm
ma'am.
trying to understand here. 4 years ago, they submitted an application for this project and fully funded at $18 million?
It was fully funded at $36 million, so it was 18 million or so. I don't remember the exact amount, but I think at the time NVTA was being asked for 50% of the project cost,
Yeah.
and the rest was met by other funding sources that were disclosed in the application at that time.
So at that time, it was just after the Amazon Commonwealth Agreement.
Okay.
And the numbers here, 18 from you guys, 8.5 from VDOT and 9.5 from CIP were the initial. estimates.
Okay, so I'm hearing two things here. You're saying now it's regionally important that this project go forward. At the time of the application was submitted, was it regionally important then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There is a Commonwealth top priority.
So what changed the priority and why are you looking to change, take money from the 22
We put in two.
Shirlington bus station?
Yeah, we put in two projects this cycle.
Yeah.
Trying to be constrained in which one we put in. Our top one would be this one, which has the biggest regional value and also is already a commitment of the company. And then we put in the second one of Shirlington and those are the two we put in.
So you want to take the funding from Shirlington and apply it to,
We would recommend that, given this rather surprising. Right, where it's falling off the page. And it's supposed to start in.
soon. What saying is that it was funded for 18 million. So you want to add an additional?
Yeah, our
11?
application was to fully fund the design build, which now that the has been completed and the full design.
That goes back to Councilmember Steele's comment about cost increases from years ago.
There's a piece of that I think we need to deal with as a policy perspective of we all know that things are inflating. In this case, it's a little bit more complicated than that because the scope also was to be further defined after the.
So if you remove funding from the Shirlington bus station, that's gonna remove that project off the books altogether.
Yeah, we would.
And you
defer
have to
that.
apply again later on.
Correct.
for this. So is it the 11 million coming from Arlington or from other funding? Can the
The
NVTA,
remaining gap, we will have to sort that out. Our CIP is in progress now, so we put some, we'll work on it there.
but there's
And
no
then
guarantee,
also with the Commonwealth, given it's there.
there's no guarantee that that gap will be met?
I mean, there's
So we're back to
not
where we,
paper signed, but I can first we guarantee.
okay, so we're back to where we started from. And originally, 4 years ago, it was funded, anticipating funding. Now the funding's not there. You want to cancel one project to add that money to this new project. And on anticipation of getting funding for the gap. So if there's no guarantee for that gap, then we might be winding up right back where we are in 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is a risk, but I think that, that's why we asked for the full amount, because we think it is a reasonable regional priority to fund the full amount. But I would rather take on a $10 million problem and figure that out in the next couple of months than a 20.
All right, that's super helpful.
Just a question for staff in terms of precedent, because obviously, you all are concerned about the precedent of project being approved under the understanding that it's fully funded, it's going to come back for additional funding if there are cost increases or refinement of the scope. Has that never happened in NVTA's history? Obviously, projects that NVTA has approved for funding and that are fully funded have had cost increases. And have those always been borne by the jurisdiction via other sources?
That is my understanding. It's not happened before, so it would be unprecedented. And the reason you may be sensing pushback on our side is, we have Councilmember Steele here who is thinking probably about his city's project, which is also being not recommended for exactly the same reason. And we are aware of other jurisdictions who did not make an application in this cycle because they correctly anticipated that NVTA would not support that. And so therefore denied themselves the opportunity of also being on this list right now and making a case that they are entitled to NVTA use regional revenues to cover a cost overrun. But it doesn't just end there. What happens in the next cycle? Everybody here could be potentially lowballing your cost estimates, knowing that a precedent has been set for a cost overage to be met through this process. And then if the costs are being lowballed, then when we calculate congestion reduction relative to the cost, that would be entirely skewed, or it may be skewed, but we won't know it's been skewed until projects get to the point where they may or may not need more money. But Virginia code does require us to give priority to projects to achieve the greatest congestion reduction relative to cost. So we got to find a way through this. I'm not diminishing the problem that you're probably all facing, but maybe it's surfaced here with Arlington and the city of Fairfax this cycle, and one other jurisdiction we're aware of that did not submit a project for exactly this reason. And we'll look at consider about what it means in subsequent cycles.
Thank you. I think, go ahead, Councilmember Singh. Supervisor. I'm sorry.
I'll join Arlington. Without any objection, I would like to go ahead and make a motion and then we can continue.
Please.
The conversation. So I move that the NVTA Planning Coordination Advisory Committee accept the NVTA staff recommendation for fiscal year 2024-2029 six-year program. It's in front of us.
I will second that, put the document on the table.
Thank you. Okay, all right, so that motion is on the table. If there is something that's making an amendment, yeah, but you would like a question, you have a
Discussion on the motion.
Yep.
So I have a question and a comment. Can Arlington speak to whether this is, it's kind of, everybody's talking about it as a cost overrun, as I'm hearing from staff, if they're viewing this as a cost overrun. And I'm curious, like, if y'all have any sort of response to that. And I'm not trying to set up like an adversarial, but I genuinely want to understand, is this a cost overrun or is having like built a metro station on the wetland, and understanding what we went through? Yeah, right nearby. So I'm just curious, like, is this cost overruns or is this a design change in a way that could not have been anticipated 4 years ago in the initial application? Has the project fundamentally changed in some way?
Yeah, it's primarily the latter, and in fact, it was anticipated that the design, literally at the time of the application, it was a connector. Whether it was a bridge or a tunnel was still to be determined in conjunction. So I think the understanding that there were technical pieces to get worked out, and my understanding is NVTA has been participating in those technical conversations throughout. Is that not?
If you're referring to the NEPA process, we're invited to listen into that. That's the only engagement we've had with the project. The project's not under a SPA yet.
Right. We are attempting to keep you in the loop, knowing that was, like any project right there is going to be kind of.
But I do not believe that the NEPA process discusses it.
Right, that we are the do.
Correct, but it sets the design changes that need to then be funded.
But then to get to what I was saying earlier, the phasing of your project when you're making your request. But the other piece is, let's say all of that aside, project has the lower congestion reduction relative to cost score. So then if we as staff had recommended that project, we would be having a different conversation with another project sponsor as to why did you recommend the lowest performing project for congestion reduction, and you didn't recommend my project that performed higher.
So I guess the question and then the comment that I have, because I appreciate like there's a process and you're trying to respect that process. Arlington's willingness, though, they're not trying to touch anybody else's money. And so that's why for me, this sort of is a conversation, right? They didn't come in with like, well, we'd like to, negotiate over somebody else's. So, to Mayor Millen's point, like, well, you're gonna lose this whole project and it's fully funded. But to some extent, if Arlington, and what I'm hearing is if Arlington had known that this was the outcome, the question I have then is if the Shirlington bus station had not been submitted, full stop, like wasn't in the mix. This project is ranked 23rd, 11 million more dollars is unspent of the 696. I realize this is like a hypothetical very much, but what I'm trying to understand is, would that have shuffled down to fund this project in some way? If they had chosen to
Probably would want a Fairfax project that you're recommending partially.
Because the same, precedent would be in play, but we wouldn't. I mean, how could we, recommend the Arlington project while still not recommending the city of Fairfax project? So in fact, it says, in all likelihood, if that 11.6 million had still been in play, it would have gone to, most likely, one of the Fairfax projects, probably the Route 7.
Yeah, it's great.
Which is all three of us that are above the PCAC project. So
And I guess that's what I'm wrestling with, because the Shirlington bus station is like 5 spots below the unfunded City of Fairfax project. So why was that decision made? Why was the ranking project 10 not funded, but ranking project 16 was?
I get it.
Yeah.
So why I see the question there. We checked the box saying it was fully funded. Right, and so when we do that, we commit to the NVTA that we are now taking on the risk of finding extra money elsewhere. I think that in hindsight, looking at that over the next 10 years, we may want to reconsider that particular space, but I will not be making a motion to move any City of Fairfax dollars around, et cetera, this evening. That is we understand how we got here. I think that I won't be here, but in the next 5-10 years, you all can look at the options that would make sense in there. But for that exact reason, we acknowledge that protect the box that was fully funded. We have to live with that decision, right, wrong, or indifferent, and so I will not be making a motion.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's, what I'm wrestling with, just admittedly, is I appreciate the low score it's getting, but the connective element of this from a multimodal perspective, from the investments being made at VRE to that station, for the traffic that flows through Alexandria to get to this station, I was a little surprised by the result as well. And I guess given Arlington's willingness to take their own other project off the table was the conversation I wanted to have. And I will leave it, I guess, to the member from Arlington to decide, how they want to respond to the motion, but those are definitely things I'm weighing, because it is a regionally important project. It is a multimodal project, and I'm pleased to see NVTA expanding sort of with, the couple of years that I've been involved here, sort of the equitable distribution of these projects. And this was a tough one to see fall off the table. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I think the precedent that spoke about is that other jurisdictions can put in applications for projects, get it funded, and then eventually later on say, oh, we want to pull that off, so we can get that money to put on this project. That's what I interpret the precedent you made. Because if this money had not, this project for the bus station had not been submitted, then funding would have went to another project. So if jurisdictions put in multiple applications for projects and their multiple applications are approved, then they see the money there for that project from the same jurisdiction. They can say, oh, we don't want to do that. We want to pull that off and then put this money toward this project. Is that a possibility, or what you mean by the precedent that we may be setting here?
I can't predict the future.
No, I'm just,
there's, Paul Van Cunningham is a I guess perhaps my words, not yours, kind of moving away from, a little bit away from NVTA funding a project, even though it's been previously declared as fully funded, to instead moving a funding recommendation from another project within the county to a project they would prefer to get funded, even though there's insufficient funds in that other project to cover more than half of the request. I mean, it doesn't change anything for us. We would, as staff, would not recommend the PCA project be approved for any further funding than the 18 million that it's already received. But it's a slightly different situation now in that, you know, Board Member Cunningham is saying she wants to move things around. Now that there is some precedent before in a few situations where jurisdictions have done that. You know, from a staff point of view, it seems to violate the process. But the law requires if you do that, you have to document the reasons why you did that. And as staff, we will respect that.
And I will note in the past, when there was one funding cycle, I remember, and we had 2 localities doing such. It was stated, don't come back and ask for additional funding for the projects that you removed money off of.
Yes.
So I actually have to leave, but I will say that, you know, there's a motion on the floor with regards to the packet presented to us and second it, and I'll be willing to vote in support of that. I will say with any additional changes, I think I will have to abstain just because it seems like this is a little bit more complicated than I initially realized. And I certainly have more questions now with regards to the internal process that Arlington County went through 4 years ago and where the disconnect is. And I feel like staff from Arlington County may need to answer some of those questions. And unless they're here tonight, I just don't think I'm prepared to support any additions, but I don't want to take that away, which is why I'm suggesting that I personally may have to abstain to any additional changes. I just have too many questions.
We do have a staff member here.
Yeah, and like I said, I also have to leave, so.
Yeah, right, so. Right, I think we've heard a lot of concerns. I don't think that Arlington, I don't think Arlington did this on purpose, for these 2 projects and move one around. Certainly, no one, I'm not suggesting that. I do think for the precedent, I'm concerned, there is a formula that has been used, so the process, the CRRC is important. And the jurisdictions that maybe did not apply that would have, and then also looking at fair impact. So, those are my concerns. I agree with you, Supervisor. To make this, like, we were gonna make this decision right now, that would be hard, because I don't think we have maybe all of the information. But, I have a lot of concerns with something like that, because I don't think that's something we want to have it, or they would want to have it. Supervisor.
I mean, maybe to that point, can you all explain, so our role here, vis-a-vis the technical advisory committee, the planning program, okay, so the idea or the practice is for each of those 3 committees to endorse the staff recommendation. And are they endorsing them with connected to their respective roles as committees, or with the same criteria? They're all just endorsing the same staff recommendation with the same set of criteria.
If I understand it correctly, yeah, each committee has already received the packet, and the packets are identical to what you have received, with the exception of the agenda titling and the summaries that are included, but everything else is the same. And so each this committee and the tax meeting later this evening will make their endorsements, whatever that may be, that's your prerogative. And then we will report both of those to the planning and programming committee, which is a committee of 5 authority members, on Tuesday evening next week, and they will take that into account, they'll develop their own endorsement. But the PPC would be the one that goes to the authority. But that doesn't in any way diminish what you decide, that will also be reported. You know, we can't take 3 conflicting sets of recommendations to the authority. We have to take one, while recognizing that any differences that may be between them will benefit the authority members.
Okay, and on this issue of, you know, projects coming back when costs have increased, I certainly recognize the value of that practice. Is that a written policy? Do we have that anywhere? Has NVTA established that as a policy?
So early on, we had 2 policies that were unpopulated, if you will, a contingency policy and a transportation reserve policy. The authority actually voted to get rid of those policies because there were concerns about lowballing. Let's say you awarded funding at 30 million, but the actual cost was 60 million. So then if we had a contingency policy or transportation reserve policy, you would come back and try to get the real funding amount through that policy. But then it would require staff to go in and try to set up some sort of process to make a recommendation to the authority, saying who would get the funding first, based on overruns or whoever asked first, based on any issues that they were having with funding the policy. So that's, and then the thought, well, another thought behind doing away with those policies, contingencies, and now I'm saying contingencies, are supposed to be built into the request. And also, when HB 2313 was adopted, we were really supposed to supplement the work that the Commonwealth was doing regarding transportation. Now, are we supplementing or supplanting? That's a different conversation, but we did want applicants to try to take advantage of all funding sources instead of just having the authority. Now, and my last point is this, admittedly, is unpopular. Everyone is getting their 30%. All the localities are getting their 30%. And I know it's being used, but that puts us in this gray area because, you know, I talked to VDOT and they said, oh, we can withhold money. The other thing, going back to the policy, when we talked about it, the attorneys were going, because the code, and again, the code doesn't mention you holding money in reserve. Now, in our SPA, we have language in the SPA that says, oh, if you run into cost overruns, and I can't remember what it says, or need more money, you know, we come back and talk to us. But right now, we don't have any money that's not programmed. All of the money we anticipate having is all program money. I know that was a long answer.
So it sounds like you're saying that NVTA has recognized this as a potential issue and tried to take steps to discourage it. But it doesn't sound like we have a policy saying you can't come back.
We don't have a policy that says you can't come back.
Yeah. And that may be something that in our resolution tonight, we could tee up as an issue for, I don't know if that's our responsibility to develop that of the planning and programming committee, or the authority itself, in the future to establish that. Maybe there's unintended consequences of having that written policy that staff could enlighten us on, but it seems like it's worthy of consideration.
Yeah, there are always pros and cons, but you know, we as staff, we take the authorities directive, but you know, pros and cons, and it's something that you would have to look at. But what I try to tell everyone, give yourself flexibility in how you word your application.
One last clarifying question. CRRC for this project is very low, and I assume that it was calculated similarly low the first time it was considered. So can you bring us back into that room? How did it get approved in the first place? Because I'm assuming it was because of this regional value.
It was from an alternative, it wasn't the lowest performing project for congestion reduction relative to cost at that time, but it was low.
Yes,
It was lower cost.
Right.
Yeah, but
so,
it's,
so this was from the FY 2020 to 2025 program. And I'd have to go back and look at what the candidate pool was. It wasn't the lowest project, it was like 5 off the bottom, as I recall. I don't know what else Arlington submitted in that cycle. And obviously it depends on what everybody else submitted in that cycle. Yeah, it's a project can perform really well in one cycle and then really badly in the next cycle just because the candidate pool changed. Yeah, we need to go back and look at that, and I think probably have that information available for when the PPC meets next week, and certainly for when the authority meets in July. My magician answers again. 35 out of 41 projects were in that candidate pool on that occasion. But in terms of what was skipped over and so on, I need to go back to the record search to see the decision-making process in more detail.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Sure. And then we
I move that the PCAC recommend authority adopt the fiscal year 24-29 program with the following amendment to the staff recommendations. That project ARL 022 Shirley Bus Station expansion change recommended funding for this period from $11,600,000 to $0, and then project ARL 023 this using PCAC and the model connection to recommended funding from $0 to $11.
Okay, let's vote. Any further discussion? Okay. Board member Cunningham. Supervisor Walkinshaw.
Yes.
Supervisor Franklin.
Abstain.
Okay. Councilmember Bagley.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Underhill. Yes. Councilmember Steely.
No.
Okay, Mayor Milan.
No.
And, oh, Ron Sainz, I'm so sorry, Supervisor.
I will say.
Okay, and my vote is also no, so that is 1, 2, 3, that is 4 nays and 4 ayes. Am I counting that right? Okay, so it fails. So that's a tie, it fails, okay. So that fails, and now we're gonna vote on the main motion. All right. Board member, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at these, okay. Board member Cunningham? No. Okay, Supervisor Walkinshaw?
Yes.
Okay, and Supervisor Franklin?
Yes.
Okay, and Councilmember Bagley?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Underhill? No. Okay. Councilmember Steely?
Aye.
Councilmember? No. Sorry about that. Sorry, I keep missing, Supervisor, saying, sorry.
Yes.
So sorry,
Aye.
you're gonna not like it, I'm sorry. And, Mayor Milan?
Aye.
Okay, and I vote aye, so that passes. Amazing.
Madam Clerk, can I make a motion?
Please.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we direct staff to evaluate the creation of a policy related to this issue of projects that have a cost increase and are resubmitted by jurisdictions. I won't further characterize it. There's pretty good
Just to study it, you were evaluating.
evaluate.
Evaluate, direct staff to evaluate projects that, whose cost increases.
And are then
And
subsequently
then resubmit,
resubmitted.
yes, and then, so, okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All right, we will vote on that, all right. Board Member Cunningham? Okay. And Supervisor Walkinshaw?
Yes.
Okay, Supervisor Franklin? Aye. Okay, and, Supervisor Sains?
Aye.
Okay, and Councilmember Bagley?
Aye.
And Councilmember Underhill?
Yes.
Councilmember Steely?
Aye.
Mayor Milan?
Aye.
And, okay, and then I vote aye, so that passes. All right, excellent. Okay,
I'd like to move that, we also encourage your direct staff to, look at the tenure at the long-term benefits and the regional balances there, so that we kind of define, if we're 20 years out, will we still be comfortable with where we are, or how do we, now that we're 10 years in, how do we balance that long-term balance question? So similarly, I think we started the meeting saying it's sort of aspirational, we're working towards it. It's not a 2-year view, it's not a day-to-day view, but in some time period, how do we make sure that we're balanced? Those.
I think this is why we do it with every funding program. It's like this funding program that's adopted by the authority, presumably next month. You have some localities that will be balanced. Then when we do it 2 years from now, we're gonna have this. The point is, we're never at one particular funding program going to have everyone even.
But over a 10-year time, I think that's, I just reflect that we should look at what that is in balance across.
Well, we have that information, but I guess the question is it based on revenues received versus out year programs? Because that will give us two different answers.
Again, I would say that's the direct staff and get staff to have a conversation about that going forward. Maybe we didn't put the slide up about long-term benefit and balance that's there now. But I think some jurisdictions have had a longer period.
Yeah, and I think we could talk offline, because I did talk to your county manager, and some of it is Arlington in particular. You've had about 87% success rate, but the projects you submit are lower dollar too. So we can have the conversation. But again, you can't, well, I'll let that go. We haven't done it.
okay, so you are making a motion.
Sure, yeah.
Say it.
The motion is to direct staff to share about what the time period and evaluation of. Okay, and so like what timeframes are we aiming to balance that across? How do we best-
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a second, all right. All right, let's go on that, okay. Councilmember, Board Member Cunningham. Yes. Okay, Supervisor Walkinshaw.
Yes.
Okay, Supervisor Sains,
Aye.
Supervisor Franklin. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. Okay, Councilmember Bagley. Okay, and Councilmember Underhill.
Yes.
Councilmember Steely.
Aye.
Okay, you, Mayor Milan.
Aye.
Okay, and I vote aye, so that passes. Okay, all right, so, where we're at right now is the, preliminary deployment plan for regional BRT system.
I'll be very brief.
Okay.
We are in the midst of a two-part work session with authority members to review the findings from our part one, which is data gathering phase, before we move into part two, which is our analytical phase. Part one was held at the June authority meeting, and part two will be held at the July authority meeting. And that's all.
Okay, thank you, and NVTA.
Madam Chair, I will just note, we are doing the state of regional transportation, of the region's transportation network that will be held here October 30th. We will be sending out save the date. Additionally, we are conducting our annual ITS transportation roundtable, October 9th. It will be here as well, and we will send out the save the date information.
Okay, now, I see that it says next meeting July 24th. Do we need to meet?
As things currently stand, having made your endorsement and other actions tonight, I do not see there will be sufficient agenda items to justify calling the meeting in July.
Okay,
The only thing that might change that is if something happens at the PPC or the authority meeting in July, but necessitates the committee to have another look at it. So I would recommend keeping the date open for now.
Okay.
And as soon as we get through the July 11th authority meeting, we'll be in a position to confirm whether you need to meet again or whether you have mission accomplished.
okay, and you have 6:30, not 5 o'clock.
That will be back on your regular fourth Wednesday at 6:30. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you, all right, is there a motion to adjourn?
May I have a question?
Oh, please.
August. Are we meeting in August?
No, you have no meeting.
Well, make sure.
No.
Guarantee that.
Make sure, okay.
Yes, we'll adjourn, there's second, I'm sure there's, all right, everyone have a nice.
All right.
Very good.
Before you jet out of here, what would be the opportunity